¡Ahí!
Mi nombre es Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara. Llegó la hora y estoy unido a ti por la libertad de Cuba.
Mi nombre es Abraham Rivera.
Adrián Rubio.
Alan Vera.
Alejandro Benítez.
Alex Alfonso.
Ángel Tour.
Yo soy Conrado Coble. Bonco Quiñongo.
Carlos Espinosa. Chucho del Chucho.
Darwin Santana Enrique.
Denis Molina Domínguez.
Fioris Lucena.
La señora del canal de las emociones.
Néstor Pérez.
Esteban Rodríguez.
Ebert Hijuelos.
Pedro Oscar Matos Leiva.
Leisa Céspedes.
Greten Arzola.
Hanna Inver.
Aro Crepo Marrero.
Hernán Hernández de Porquiani.
Jorge Sayas.
José Daniel Ferrer.
José Ramón Benítez Álvarez.
José Armando Morales Pérez.
Julio Suárez.
Karen García.
Laureano Póngaro.
Miguel Hernández Sotolón.
Lucinda González.
Manuel Milanés.
Miguel Candelario.
Luis Pardolas.
Manny Pato.
Pablo Pérez.
Aidel Taller.
Enriquet Caballero Dominico. Roberto San Martín.
Rosa Rojas.
Silvio Valentón Callado.
Silverio Portal Contreras.
Ultra. Yamila, la hija de Maceo.
Víctor Orfidero.
Llegó la hora. Y estoy unida aquí. Por la libertad de Cuba. Patria y vida.
Patria y vida.
Patria y vida. Patria y vida.
Y vida.
Patria y vida.
Patria y vida.
Este es un llamado para todos los cubanos. Cuba nos necesita. Llegó la hora.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining me tonight. This is another edition of Let's Talk About Cuba, and in today's program, we have a special person with us that has so thoughtfully let us interview him. We are going to be talking, the series of interviews that I have been providing is so that people can see the difference between what life is really like in Cuba from hands-on, people that have lived there, compared to how their life is today after they have left the country. And let's see. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to Gabriel Duque. Hi, Gabriel. I'm going to add you on here. How are you tonight?
Hi, Iskra. I'm doing great.
Good.
Thank you for having me. You can hear me okay now, right?
Yes, I can hear you okay now. I think it was also a problem on my side, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, I was trying to do it from my laptop, and I thought that was a problem. So I'm on my phone now. I'm glad you can hear me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you for being here. It's so this series, like I said, before, I want people to see and learn about real Cubans, just everyday Cubans like yourself and and others that have come on, how their life was in the island compared to how your life is now. So tell me a little bit about yourself. First, let's start with your full name is Gabriel Duque. Where do you currently live, Gabriel?
I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
In Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Now, you were born in Cuba.
Yes.
And what years? And
so I was born in 1975, and I came from Cuba in 1995. I was almost 20 years old at the time.
Wonderful. So you were a child in Cuba, you were a teenager in Cuba, and you were a young adult in Cuba, which is currently what this new generation that's actually uprising is that young adult age range. So I'm glad that you can join us tonight. Now, talk to us about your life in Cuba. How was it?
So my life in Cuba was the same as everybody else's. We were all forced to go to the same schools that were all controlled by the government. We were all forced to receive the same doctrine day in and day out. We were all forced to keep our mouth shut, and say what we needed to say to survive. So I could say I had a good life because my parents sacrificed a lot to try to give us the best life they could, given the circumstances.
Right.
But the lack of freedom was something that was obvious from a very young age.
Right. So for our audience that don't understand what doctrine means, in a child's education, because, a lot of this, people just don't understand. What do you mean
Right.
you're getting indoctrinated in school? How do children get indoctrinated in school in Cuba?
Yeah, and it's important to understand that when Castro came to power, he took over all the schools. So they have full control of the educational system. There are no options for you to send your children to any kind of private school or religious school. The only option is the public school, which is controlled by the Communist Party, the one and only legal party in Cuba. And you are forced to repeat different things every day. You're supposed to wear a uniform. You're supposed to pledge allegiance to their revolution, and you're supposed to say you want to be like Che Guevara every morning, who we know that he was an assassin, but they paint him as a hero. And you have no control over any of this, because if you refuse to do any of this, not only do you get in trouble, but your parents get in trouble too. And it's important to understand that the government is the only employer, the only supplier of everything that you need to survive. Right. In 1960, they nationalized, they expropriated everything down to an ice cream cart. So everybody has to work for the government. They own all the stores, they own all the means of production. You have no way to live a life off the grid, as they say here sometimes. So they have complete control of your life, complete control of your parents' life. So children from a very early age are taught what they can and cannot say outside of the house, and even inside the house, if you can be heard or if there's people in the house that you can't trust. So you learn that childhood innocence that kids have, you don't get to have, because you learn very early on that you can get your parents into serious trouble for saying the wrong thing.
Right. I mean, and people, this is so important because, today's society, that's just not something that's common. So, a lot of propaganda is out there about, and this is why I do these series in English, because there's a lot of propaganda out there regarding our country that looks at it as this, wonderful tourist island, with the beautiful beaches and, all these historical cars and buildings, but they don't have a full background of the real life of the real people. And that's why I thought, these series were so important. So, when we talk about indoctrination, you mentioned, obviously things that they make you say and do, but there's also a history inside the education, the history books, and in all of this.
Absolutely.
Yes. Today,
and it's not until you leave the island that you learn that a lot of the things they taught you were completely changed by them, just to paint themselves in a good light, and it's really sad. It's really sad because books are forbidden that don't go along with their lies, and you can get in serious trouble for having certain books, for listening to certain music. All of those things are part of the system of repression, and we saw what happens. We saw what happens when people try to protest simply to ask for freedom peacefully. We have people that are now in jail, simply people that didn't even protest, but they simply, because they've shared something on social media, they came knocking on their doors and they took them away. It's terrible. And kids are they're forced to go work on the fields, and at the age of 11 or 12, as early as that, in my time, and I think this still takes place today under normal circumstances, maybe not so much with COVID, but every year we were forced to go work a whole month in the fields. And when you get older, it was 45 days. And if you didn't go, like I didn't go, which you could only get out of it by finding some medical papers or something, because you couldn't just say no. You had to give them some kind of an excuse. But even then, that would translate into consequences. As in my case, even though I was an A student all throughout, I was not allowed to go to college. They simply said you cannot even apply. Cannot even apply, even though I was the top of my class from first grade all the way to 12th grade. Top of my school, in fact. So they control everything. You can't, at that point, it's not like here where you can say, okay, they don't take it in this school, well, I'll apply to this school. Well, they own all the schools. So if they say no, it's no. And right. And so then they talk about being blocked by the US. They block themselves because they don't reward productivity, creativity. All they reward is loyalty to the one and only party, to the detriment of everything else. So that's why the economy doesn't work. It's not because of the embargo, which allows them still to do business with the entire world. And today, they can't even supply food to the stores that are in dollars, that are overpriced. Those stores are not stocked. They have nothing to sell. And it's hard to believe because they could even buy directly from the US. The US embargo does not stop them from buying food or medication. And even though they sell it at an overpriced price, which is sometimes 3-4 times as much as what you would pay in the US, they still can't manage to stock those stores. That's how inefficient they are. They take the money that we send, because at this point they're surviving on money being sent from the exile community, and they're using it to buy police cars and riot gear and weapons to suppress any kind of uprising, because that's all they care about. They're not using it to buy medication. They're not using it to buy food. And so then they turn around, they try to blame it all on the US.
Right. Now you mentioned that you left when you were 20. So you couldn't go to school because you weren't part of the system?
Right. And to be
Does that happen often?
I actually recorded a little video about it, which the godmother, as we call her, from Canal de las Emociones, she watched it and she was very supportive of it. And I recorded a video where I showed my student file, because every student has a file that they start in first grade and you take all the way to 12th grade. And your teachers and other people in the school, they write in this file. And my file is filled with marks that are 90, 99, 100, they're usually based on 100. And I won different contests, like on mathematics, and a bunch of accolades all around. And yet when I got to 12th grade, the last line on my file says this student was found not to be apt to continue further education. And this was a result of a meeting where they brought in a bunch of people from the school, from my class, from other classes, and they basically said that because I didn't go to work in the fields every year and other things, other activities, I would not qualify.
Wow.
And they try to embarrass me in front of everybody, and basically said that I was not committed enough to the revolution. I wasn't brave enough like those kids to go and say, I want freedom or anything like that. I did not take it anywhere near as far. But whatever I did was too much for them. They needed 100% loyalty.
Right. Now, what did your parents do in Cuba?
My mother is a doctor and my dad's a chemist. Education was very important in my family. My grandmothers were teachers, and ever since I was a little kid, I was told that the goal was to go to college and get a college degree. And my parents and my grandmother, they proudly displayed their college degrees on the walls. And I knew that was a goal, and that's what I wanted to do. At the same time, I knew that having a college degree would make it really hard for me to leave the island. My mother, as a doctor, she tried to come to the US to see her father as a visitor. She asked for a visitor permit. And for those of you who don't know, at least at the time, to leave Cuba, even to visit another country, you required to be released by the government. And if you were a professional, you had to have a special release from the department that you belonged to, in this case, the Department of Health or the Ministry of Health, as they call it. And my grandfather lived in the US since the 70s, and he was very ill. And my mother asked for a US visa, and the US gave her a visa right away as a visitor. And then she had to go request her permit to leave the island and come see my grandfather. Well, the minister just held on to her request. They did not deny it. They did not approve it. She kept asking and asking, and it was held up for over a year. And my grandfather passed away, and she couldn't see him. And that was really sad. And she couldn't even go and tell him, look what you've done. Because at that point, they would have said, okay, fine, then you don't need to go. So she had to keep her mouth shut through her tears. And that was part of her decision to finally, when they did release her after like a year and a half, and she came, she decided to stay. Even though we were young and it was really tough for her, she said, I have to stay because I have to get my children out of there. And so she did. And then we were able to come along later on.
So how long were you apart from her?
So I turned 17 the day that she left. And when we reunited, I was almost 20. So almost 3 years. And then my dad had a similar situation. He was also a professional. So he also had to ask for permission also to leave only as a visitor. My uncle had he had open heart surgery. He was very, very sick in the US. Luckily, he's still alive and kicking, doing really well. But my father tried to leave, asked for permission. In his case, they didn't just hold it. They said no. They said, we can't allow you to leave because you know secrets. Wow. My father worked in a cement laboratory that was responsible for quality analysis of all the cement production in the entire island. And the only secret that he knew was not a secret. It was something everybody knew. All the factories were shut down because these were the 90s, the middle of the special period, as they call it, which was especially horrible. That's what it was, special. And you know, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and all the factory parts came from the Soviet Union, so the factories were shut down. And that's what he knew. There was no real secret. So he was not allowed to leave. He had to basically pretend to be mentally ill with the help of doctors and make himself useless to them and wait. And eventually they allowed him to leave. And he reunited with my mom, and my sister and I were left behind with my grandparents, who also eventually had to come because they had visitors visa and they were older. And we said, you can't let your visa expire because you're going to be alone in Cuba. So they left. So my sister and I were left alone. Now, at that point, we were 18. I was probably 18. She was 19. But, you know, kids in Cuba grow up a lot faster. And part of it is what we talked about, the fact that you lose your innocence very early on. So, yeah, and luckily, you know, this was the time of the last time there were protests in Cuba back in '94. That what they call it Malagonazo, and at that time Clinton signed laws that allowed us to leave a little sooner than we would have normally been able to come. So we made it, and we came here, and both my sister and I went to college, and we've had great careers here, and we've had a great life.
Yeah, thank God for that.
Now,
do you remember the ration foods and how that whole concept?
Oh,
I
absolutely.
would to explain it to our audience.
Yeah, so everybody has a ration book, and they still do. I wasn't sure if that was still around, but I was listening to some of the YouTubers from Cuba today, and they still very much do have that. And it's a ration book that every family has, and once a month you get to go to the local store. Again, all the stores are owned by the government, and then if some of this merchandise arrive, you get to purchase a rationed amount of rice, beans, very little. Even in the good times, you know, the 80s is what I call the golden era of socialism, because at that point I think they had everything in place, and the USSR rather was pumping money and oil into the Cuban economy because they wanted that shining star, you know, across the street from the U.S. look like socialism was a success. And even then, things were not great. But at least you could put some food on the table. You know, my parents were professionals, and they had, relatively speaking, higher salaries, and they were able to feed us, and they sacrificed everything so we could eat and we could have a decent life. But everything was rationed, and then outside of that, you had to go to the black market, which makes everybody a criminal, because things like red meat, for example, were not something that even with, you could not get it legally in any form. People with cancer and stuff were allotted a tiny little piece of meat maybe once every couple months. So unfortunately, the butcher needed to make money on the side, because whatever money he was paid was not enough to feed his family. So they would steal part of that meat and they would sell it in the black market. But you could go to jail just for having a quarter of a pound of meat on you if you were caught. So that's how bad it was. Wow. And so we survived buying things in the black market, and during in 1989, when the Soviet Union collapsed and all that, things became even way worse, and we didn't have any. We had blackouts that sometimes would last for 24 hours. Every day there was at least 8 hours of blackouts, and imagine blackouts in Cuba, and it's so hot,
and we are seeing, just so the audience understands, we're seeing some of those in today's Cuba as well,
right?
Because we have there's no anything. So
right.
In today's Cuba, they're going through very similar to the special period in the 90s. They're going through 4 to 6, 8 hours of blackouts. Where
they were bailed out of that by Venezuela in the late 90s when Hugo Chavez took power. But then now that Venezuela is collapsing, they can't supply enough oil. I guess they're still giving them some, but it's not enough to keep the power on. So yeah, we had terrible blackouts. There was no food. Luckily, our family outside the Cuba, in the U.S. and in Spain, would send us money. And at the time, my mother had one of the highest salaries on the island as a doctor. Doctors at the time got paid some of the highest salaries, and her monthly salary was the equivalent of $3 American. Yeah. So imagine how much food you can actually buy with that. And that was her good salary. So other people had even less.
Now, were your parents part of the Communist Party?
No, they were not.
Not at all.
They tried to recruit them, and they found ways to not overtly refuse, but to not get involved and yet not get fired, which is a very fine line to walk.
Exactly. From what I understand, most people that are not in the Communist Party don't have jobs, or can't get, like yourself, they can't go to school. So you leave at the age of 20, you come to the United States, and you go to the university. What did you study?
I studied computer science. I went to Florida International University. I had shown an interest for computers at an early age in programming, and so that's what I did. I studied computer science. What's interesting is when I came from Cuba, I despised that life so much in Cuba, and they made, they took ownership of everything that the Castro regime. They call themselves the homeland. They equated patriotism with supporting them. So in my mind, I wanted nothing to do with Cuba. And I came to Miami, like, there's all these Cubans everywhere. I don't want any Cuban food. I would go to Boston Market and I love their food. I want nothing to do with plantains or anything like that. And it was part of I think I needed to do that to heal.
Right.
And after college, I got a job with IBM in Houston, and I moved out to Houston. And when I moved away from Miami, which is kind of like leaving Cuba, the good Cuba, this time, then I started to miss it, and I would try to come all the time. And at the time, this is 1999 or early 2000, it was the whole Elian Gonzalez saga, which I'm sure you remember.
Oh, yes.
And at that point, I felt such a strong connection to what was going on, kind of similar to what's been happening now recently, because I saw myself in this kid who his mother had gone into the U.S. hoping for a better life for him, and how he was in the middle of this game. And at the time, I joined protests locally in Houston. I even appeared on TV over there. And eventually I made it back. I actually made it back within the year. You know, and it was kind of I think I had finally healed enough that I could say, okay, I am going to reclaim my country that belongs to me, that they took away. And so, yeah, I worked for IBM, and I came back and worked for a lot of companies here. I worked for Carnival Cruise Lines in Miami, a company called Citrix Systems, which is very close to where I live now. My sister still works there because she had she went to college also for something along the lines of computer science, and then both her and I did an MBA that our company paid for. I did, you know, in my video, I talk about education here versus education in Cuba. In Cuba, they claim it's free education, but you have to pledge allegiance to their Communist Party, and then you finish your college, which is quote unquote free, but then you owe them your life. It's not like here people complain sometimes they have a large student loan. The reality is there is a set dollar amount that you can pay. I know we know there's a, you know, it's a challenge. That's clear for some people, especially. There is something you can pay and be free. Whereas in Cuba, there is no amount that you can pay. They own you. They own your life. You're basically a slave. And we see with the doctors that they send away, and even take their passports, and they're making money off of these professionals. And it's really, really sad. And they're paying them peanuts. And these people are taking that opportunity because it's the best opportunity they have. Because on the island, their families are starving. So they're going there and, you know, coming back, you know, probably making thousands and thousands for the regime, for the dictatorship. And they're coming back with maybe, you know, a couple $100 worth of stuff for their families.
And for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, we look it up. I have several videos about this, but basically, you know, this is the second most profitable business for the dictatorship. The first one being tourism, and the second one being, you know, sending away these doctors on missions, which, you know, it's basically slavery. It's what it is, because they take away, you know, 90% of their salaries, and if they don't do everything that they are expected, which is a lot, and a lot of it is indoctrination in the end.
Indoctrination, yes.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, making up a lot of things because they have a quota that they have to go through. So it's really a nightmare, and it's something to look into. Now, this is wonderful. So, you know, all of a sudden you have a whole new life. Congratulations. And,
Thank you.
And this is why I want to do these types of videos, because I want people to see, you know, the difference between, you know, what we go through there, you know, to get an education, and, you know, how not everything that shines is as good as it looks, because, you know, people believe that just because we have a good health care and free health care and free education, which is really not free. And I want people to understand this, because it's just public education, which is what we have here in the US, and it's also public health care. But they are taking almost 90% of people's salary to subsidize these things. And in all honesty, it's not good at all. I mean, the education has gotten worse and worse and worse by them every year that I see.
And even when some of the teachers or professors might still be very good people, very knowledgeable and all that, they don't even have the materials to, you know, the books, or you're doing chemistry, there's nothing to do experiments with. If you're a doctor, these doctors that they're sending to other countries, they haven't had a chance to use any sophisticated instrumentation. They don't know most of these medications, so they're winging it, I'm sure. But they're going to places where doctors from those countries don't want to go. So I guess, those people are lucky to get whatever they can because they're scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I know that you've been in constant contact, regarding July 11th, because I've seen some of the videos. So how do you feel about July 11th? What do you think?
Well, for a long time, I avoided talking about Cuba or watching the news because it was just depressing. It felt like nothing was ever going to change. And then this thing happened. And before that, we had the San Isidro events that they did, and that was very encouraging as well. But then we had this boom, and I think a lot of us have come back and have seen, we saw what those kids did, what they went through, what they're going through now, and we all feel this urge, sense of responsibility, that we have to do something. And this is why I've started to do videos and try to talk to people to educate them. I had the first thing I did is I recorded a video for my English speaking friends in English, for talking about the need to keep the embargo as it was. And I was one that at one point I said, we tried it for so long and these people are suffering. Maybe we should lift it so that we remove the excuse of this is why things are the way they are. At one point I was there, this was years ago, because I saw the suffering, I saw that nothing changed, and like, at least maybe this will bring them a little relief, and this would also remove the excuse. But the reality is, if we remove the embargo, they would get access to all these credit lines, to all these investments, and they would just use all of that money to further repress their people, to incarcerate, to buy. We see it now. They supposedly don't have resources for ambulances, but yet they have oil in brand new police cars and riot gear and all this stuff. And we already feel guilty as exiles because of the money that we send to relatives in Cuba being used for this. We don't need the rest of the U.S. to become an unwilling accomplice to all of these horrible things. So, plus, we know that when the dictatorship has had more funds, they've used it only to spread their cancer all over the world. In Africa and Latin America, they are responsible for so much killing and so much uprising, and it's horrible and it's really bad. And even though they can pay themselves as the victims, they're nothing like that. They're absolutely not victims. They're horrible, horrible people.
I agree. And that was another one of my questions is, how do you feel this has affected, how Cuba has really affected Central and South America, with their communism?
I would hope that people realize that, I have a lot of friends from South America, and a lot of them have lived here a while, so most of them have known for a while that things aren't as they used to paint them back in their countries, but they tell me that growing up they thought that people in Cuba were very happy because the Cuban government has spent a ton of money making sure that that's what happens. And music, for example, is one of the easiest ways to spread messages, and normal free countries don't have the luxury of controlling their artists when they send them, across the borders. But in Cuba, all the artists have to support the system, or they pay the consequences. So, all their most famous singers, who have been very famous for many years, have been singing the praises of the regime to their audiences, and people think that people in Cuba are very happy, and it's all about hating the U.S. and everything is great. And in reality, these people are nothing but paid agents of the government. And Cuba, for being such a poor country, has more embassies than most countries in the world. And the whole point of that is to spread more of those lies. We, as Cubans, we're one of the few people that where embassies don't represent us, don't protect us if we're outside of the country. They are not there for that. They are there to represent the interests of the dictatorship and to export all this fake propaganda and control the message. And that's what they're there for, and to coordinate with all the spies that they have all over the world.
Right. And unfortunately, we have seen even here in the U.S. how they have tried, or they're trying to bring that propaganda. As a matter of fact, we have when Bridges of Love, who go around, saying that they want the embargo taken down, and we just saw, the actual president of Bridges of Love meeting with the president, the supposed president of Cuba, and it's obvious to us as Cubans what's happening there, but a lot of people from the U.S. don't understand. They don't have this background that we have. So I think it's important for us to explain to them that basically they're being manipulated, or they're doing negotiations behind our backs, behind the people of Cuba's back, because this is not what the people from Cuba want. They don't want to negotiate with that government. They don't want to the U.S. to negotiate with that government. They want freedom, which is what they were asking out in the streets, and so I think it's important for us to bring that message and explain to people here in the U.S.
Cuba is a country with so much potential. When you see, even after 62 years of dictatorship, you see the video, you see the footage of these protests, and you can see those beautiful cities behind them. A lot of them are crumbling, but it's a testament to how well they were built that they're still standing for the most part, and you can still see their beauty, and not to mention the beaches and everything else, and then the potential of the people of Cuba, and all of that potential has been frozen for 62 years, and these people haven't had a chance to grow because the system destroyed everything. They took everything over. They're like a parasitic cancer. They inherited all this wealth from all this Cuban and U.S. companies, and they dilapidated all of that. Then they needed the USSR to support them. Then when they collapsed, they didn't know how to survive. Then they found Venezuela, and now they're desperate because Venezuela is bankrupt, and so is Russia, and we know China may call themselves communists and they repress their people, but at the end of the day, they care about profits.
Right.
And Cuba's not going to give them any profits, so they're not going to be giving them a whole lot. Right. And it's sad because Cuba's now taking donations from Haiti, a country that has so many problems and is so poor, and Cuba's in a worse position, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be when Cuba was one of the top countries in Latin America when they took over.
Right.
But it's a result of a system that, like I said before, only rewards loyalty to the party and does not allow any kind of freedom of expression or speech or of ideas. Nothing. They make decisions at the top, and God forbid you go against those decisions or you criticize them in any way. We all know the famous mistakes that Castro made when he decided to remove all the fruit trees outside the city of Havana and plant coffee when people knew coffee grows in the mountains. And of course it was a disaster, and now it had no fruit or coffee, but no one dared tell him he was wrong, because that you would risk your life, literally. I think it's important that people understand that the dictatorship controls all the media. There is no independent press. The few independent journalists that exist now are risking their lives because they are illegal in that country. And whatever little they can do is very limited because they don't have access to any data. They don't get to interview politicians or anybody like that. All they have is whatever people tell them. The official, the newspapers, the television stations, the radio stations are all owned, controlled by the government, and they all have to stay in line and say what they tell them to say. So there's no checks and balances. A lot of times when I'm talking to people here in the U.S. and I want to quickly explain to them why things don't work in Cuba. You know, the people tend to have a short attention span. But I tell them, look, imagine if the government owned, you know, a lot of times we're at lunch, and like, imagine if the government owned this restaurant. Even in the US, where government employees are paid good money, where there's all kinds of checks and balances to make sure that government agencies run and that the funds are used properly, blah, blah, blah. Even then, Americans understand the government has no business running a restaurant.
Right.
So imagine when the government of Cuba is running everything. They already know that that's set to fail. And then on top of that, they get rid, or they silence, or they make sure that people that don't providing full loyalty are not given opportunities, and that instead the opportunities are given to those that support the government. You know, my mother was a director of an institution at one point in Cuba that cared for the mentally disabled, and so she had the highest position in the organization, and she was almost fired by this lady who was under her, because this lady was a member of the Communist Party. And so she had immense power over my mother, and all because my mother needed her, and she pulled her out of a meeting, the party meeting, because she needed to help for an emergency. And that almost cost my mother her job. Wow. This launderer had so much power just because she was a member of the Communist Party. So these are the type of stories that we heard, you know. Things like my grandmother, for example, she was a teacher, and she wanted to reunite with my grandfather, who was here. When she applied to get her paper, she wasn't even ready to leave the U.S. yet. It was just the start of the process. She applied to get a passport. Well, immediately a school was notified, and first they told her, you can no longer teach. You can come back on Monday, but you're going to be a janitor. And so she had to go from being the teacher to cleaning the bathrooms. And, you know, she was a single mother at that point. She had no choice. So she said, fine, I'll come do that. And so she showed up on Monday to work. And then they told her, no, you can't even do that. You can't be around the children because you're a traitor. So she was sent home with no job and nothing to fall back on. So she had to be supported by her sisters. She eventually couldn't leave because at some point Castro said no one can leave. For 10 years, no one could leave the island, no matter what. And so she had to live from things that she did on her own in the black market and through charity from her family. And then my mother eventually became a doctor, and she would help her. And, you know, my parents, you were talking about the fact that you had to be very involved to be able to go to college, and that's true. I think at the time that my parents went to college, they were able to do so because they're older. So at that point, a lot of the professionals had left the island. So many that they couldn't be as picky. They had to let people that perhaps they would have preferred not to allow to go to college. So that's how they were able to do that, because they were not members of the Communist Party or anything like that.
Yeah. This is horrible what people go through to be able to survive.
Yeah, I was remembering
survive because, you know, if you look at it, no one's really striving. They're barely surviving, and
that's even though they take and take and take. When we left Cuba, we had to leave behind our house, which my great grandfather bought in the early 19th century, and it was a beautiful house in one of the best neighborhoods in Havana, and we couldn't give it to anybody. You're not allowed at the time. You weren't allowed to sell it. You weren't allowed to give it away. You weren't allowed to leave someone there because that person would have had to be there for several years in order for them to be allowed to stay and keep the house. So we had to leave it. At one point, my sister and I were called. We were trying to go to Panama. We had family members that were trying to help us go through Panama to leave the country. We had some family members that were connected with the Panamanian government, and they were trying to help us. And so they called us. They called this army lady shows up, because immigration, everything is controlled by the army. They showed up at our door, gave us an appointment, and said, you need to just go to this address. And, you know, we're hopeful, like, okay, this means things are moving. They're going to give us some papers. So her and I, you know, we were children. I was 18, maybe she was 19, something like that. they sit us across from this. I think he was a general. I don't know. This very intimidating man, and he tells us that he has information that we've been trying to sell furniture, that we've been selling furniture from our house. So, and that we were leaving the country, we couldn't sell anything. So this is what he said to us, and we had given away a couch. It was true. We didn't sell it. We gave it away. The couch that my grandfather probably bought at that point, about 60 years ago, way before the revolution. Because since the revolution, you couldn't buy anything. Everything that we had was at least 40 years old. And now we could. So it was very scary. It was very scary. And luckily, we denied it, and somehow that went away. But I think that the godmother, as we call her, she talked about the inventory. Whenever you said you were leaving the country, they would come in and they would do an inventory of your entire house, which is very painful. And my maternal grandmother tells a story that when they did her inventory, the lady that came in, in Cuba, they try to be very nice, and so she said, "Okay, I'm gonna make you some coffee." After she was done with the inventory, she said, "I'm going to make you some coffee." And she's like, "Oh, you have a coffee maker. We forgot to put that down in the inventory." So she put down her coffee maker, which is horrible. And that's how. And then before you left, and so people understand, at the latest, the day before you were supposed to fly, they would come in, and you better have everything that's in the inventory. And if you didn't, you need to find it because you're not leaving the country. And then you had to leave your house. They would put a seal on the door. And that night, you had to find a place to stay. And all you could take is perhaps a small suitcase, and that's it. You had to leave everything behind. You couldn't give it away. You couldn't sell it. All your memories, all of that, and you would become a non-person. The minute that you claimed that you didn't want to stay there, you didn't want to leave there, you were told that you were a traitor, and you were called all kinds of names, and
Yes, I remember. Unfortunately, I actually lived it when I was very young.
Getting very noisy. I don't know if it's on your end.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can hear you fine. Let me see. I think my audio, for some reason, continues to. Let me see if I take that off. Can you hear me better now? Any better? No? Is it noisy? Jeez.
Yeah, it sounds very robotic.
Really? Huh. No. I'm having some technical difficulties here. I might have to get that fixed. Any luck?
I think it's getting better now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's good now.
Okay, good. I've put on the link of if anybody wants to join us. Is there anything from your end you would like to tell our audience? I know you have a YouTube channel, and I would love for you to, you can put it on the private chat so I can put the link on here for everybody.
I will.
Oh, okay. So they're telling me the audio is good on their end. So I don't know.
Okay, good. So maybe it's just me.
So
it's good now for me as well.
Wonderful. If anybody wants to join us, you're more than welcome to. Please. And I have put the links there. I'll put it on again. In the meantime, I know that Gabriel is going to give us his. Okay, I'm going to add it on here.
Do you have my link, or I can send it to you?
If you can send it to me through the private chat, that would be great.
I will. Let me just find it. I'm doing this from my phone, which wasn't what I originally had planned.
I do I don't have a production team here, so it's all me, and so it's hard sometimes to. Oh, you froze up on me. I think you're having technical issues on your end. So if anybody wants to join us, I'm going to go ahead. Gabriel, I'm sure will be back soon. Gabriel, you might need to go out and come back in because I'm hearing noises and you're frozen. If anybody has questions about what we're speaking today, what we have talked about, if you have questions for Gabriel, if you have questions for me about what life is like in Cuba, please join us, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And one of the things that we have, okay, we're back.
From my laptop. I'm trying to turn off my phone now so that it.
Okay, there you go. That's much better.
Yeah, this is.
Oh, you're frozen again. Okay.
Am I frozen?
You were for a second. You're good now.
Okay.
Okay. Now I have seen. I think it's your sister that is on here, Marta Duque.
That's my sister.
Putting a lot of comments on the. So Martha, nice to meet you, and I hope I get to meet you in person.
We're almost twins. We're barely a year apart. So we've gone through life together, always same schools, and we worked together for a long time at 2 different companies, actually.
Oh,
so we're very close.
That's wonderful. I'm very close to my brothers as well. I'm the oldest. I have a younger, 2 years younger than me. And then I have one that's 14 years younger than me. So that's the baby of the house. But yes, we're very close. And so it's always good to have family around. And, and you mentioned, that part of your story about you being apart from your family for 3 years, or your parents, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That happens a lot in our country. And people don't understand, how this affects the families themselves, and I think the system itself is set up for this to happen. They want people to immigrate so that they can send money to the families they left behind.
Absolutely.
And it's again, part of the system.
I just shared the link to my channel.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I don't think this is a friendly name. I don't know how to set that up yet. I'm very new to this.
Well, you have to be. I think there's a criteria now, and I don't know if it's different now, but I think you have to have it at least 1 month. And I'm going to share it here on my banners. I'll add it to my banners so that people can actually. There it is, and I'm also going to share it on the comments as well. I'm going to share it here on the chat as well so that people have your link, because it's so long, they can just copy it and go into your channel. Now, do you have dates that you come on, or?
Well, no. In fact, I've never done a live. All I've done is upload some videos. I don't have enough subscribers that I feel that I could go live.
Right.
A lot of people that follow me on social media are English speakers, and so I didn't really bring them on because I really wanted to talk to people of Cuba. So my video that I did do that first video in English about the embargo, but then the second video I did talking about my experience trying to go to college and all of that, I did it in Spanish, and I really wanted it to get to people in Cuba. And I was very happy because I reconnected with people that I hadn't talked to in 30 years.
Wonderful.
Almost 30 years that I've left. I guess now it's 26 years. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but yeah, people that from my neighborhood. And I wanted the message to get to them. And I was happy because I think some of the people that we thought that they were sympathizers, they actually agreed with what I had to say. So I felt that it was mission accomplished there. And that's what I tell everybody. You may only get to 2 or 3 people, but that's fine. You may be repeating the same thing that somebody else is saying, but now they're going to hear it from somebody.
I agree.
I agree. Or somebody they relate to for whatever reason, whether you're the same sex or have the same background or whatever. your message can get to people perhaps better than someone else's that is more famous or more knowledgeable or whatever.
I agree.
So
I
so
agree. I was actually in a Twitter chat the other day, and one of those chats on Twitter, and someone came into the chat, and I was speaking randomly about something else, and a young person from Cuba came into the chat and said that they actually followed me, on social media. And I was like, wow, you never know how far these things can get to people, and I'm glad that, as even if it's one or two people, we're making a difference. And I think that's why, I decided to do my channel in English. And I encourage you to do more, English videos, because honestly, there's not enough people speaking in English,
Right.
and this needs, these types of conversations need to be had, because, I believe that the propaganda out there is so horrible, against, what we're fighting for, and what.
Yeah, I know. I realize that there's definitely a void
Yeah.
on the market with people who not only speak English, but who also have that background where they understand this, where they, you and I were born in Cuba, where we had some
Right.
personal experience or very close from our families.
I think this uprising now, the July 11th has started something new. People are now curious. I know that for my generation, and I came in the 80s, so a lot of my cousins, and my own family, they're not politically involved as I was before this, because I've been doing this for a very long time, believe it or not. But they weren't, people would say, "You're crazy. Why are you doing this?" And, and I kept doing it because I knew, because I have contacts with people in Cuba. So I knew exactly what was happening there. And I knew at one point this would happen. And to be honest with you, now that, people are seeing that there is a possibility that,
Right.
people are waking up, I think, and it happened to me 4 years ago when I went to Washington, D.C., and I saw so many Cubans come together, for La Marcha de los Prohibidos, the prohibited march. When I saw so many people come together, I said, wow, because I had been slept for too long. Yeah, that's what happens. Like, you give up because you feel like
Right.
people
You lose hope, and it's painful. It's
never-
painful to watch these people suffering and nothing changes. And
Correct.
But I've
correct.
always known that if something was going to happen, it had to start there. It had to start in Cuba.
Absolutely.
And so when it did, I'm like, okay, they've made their move, and now we have to make our moves, and we can't stop.
We can't.
And now there's definitely this sense of inevitability that something will have to happen soon again, and we need to keep doing what we can here to support them.
I agree. I agree. Well,
And it means a lot. I think, initially it was like, well, people are probably people from Cuba are probably looking at us and saying, well, it's easy for you to talk because you're not in Cuba. But the reality is, we don't have to. I mean, most of us don't really have a plan to go live in Cuba, but we're doing this because we love our country.
Correct.
So I need to get some water.
Correct. No, I was going to thank you for your time. It's been, an hour. So I think, I'm going to let you go because I don't want to take up more of your time than I need to. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us. I will continue to, send out your link to everyone around, and hopefully, people will watch your videos as well. Please, everybody, subscribe to Gabriel's YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. And thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for your time. Thank you for caring for our country. Thank you for giving me this special moment. It's been a wonderful.
Thank you, Istra. And before I go, I just wanted to mention that it's been really rewarding to see some of the younger generations, a lot of people in my family and other families that weren't even born in Cuba, and they have been so identified with the cause, and they've been sharing on social media.
Yes.
A lot of my family members are, joined this session today. My cousin Jasenia and my cousin Giselle and Luis, and it's just great to have them. And I know it's very satisfying for the older generations. I thought that perhaps they wouldn't see this happening. So anyway, but thank you so much for what you do.
It's been very rewarding. My children, of course I pass, you try to pass on these traditions and you talk about, your painful moments and everything you've gone through, and they know what our family has gone through. But of course they're in their own little life and it's hard, especially as they were teenagers. But now that they're in their 20s and they saw this and they're getting involved and they're going to marches, and to see my own children, that were born here in the U.S., have that connection to the people in Cuba, it's very rewarding for me. So I agree. I think we need to get them more involved, because they're part of this history. They're part of of who we are. I'm a firm believer that if you don't know where you came from, you have no way of knowing where you're going. So
yeah, and they've been robbed because so many other children and grandchildren of immigrants can still freely go to the country of their parents and their grandparents, and a lot of times, I hear about people from Colombia that all of a sudden 2 generations later they decide to go live in Colombia, and it's fine and it's not a big deal, and whereas that's not possible for us. And it's just really sad. It's really sad that but hopefully that's not going to be our future.
Well, thank you very much again. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gabriel. Have a great night. Well, it's been a wonderful night. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, I put up the link for people to come in if they wanted to. I know that it's it's Monday and it is hard for people to make it in. So I thank Gabriel for his time. I thank every single one of you that joined me on the chat, that joined me somehow. My Facebook actually got the link was not working. So I thank you all for for participating. I thank you for being here. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please do so. And I'm going to put that on here again. This is Gabriel's channel. I will add our channel, which is Let's Talk About Cuba 1. Please look us up on YouTube, subscribe, and put on the little campanita, the little bell, so that you get the noise, the notification whenever we come on. I thank you again for being here with us, and good night. Have a great one.